In that deep well forgotten by time, the archaeologists' hands trembled slightly. What they unearthed was not gold coins, nor statues, but dozens of small fragments of infant remains. Some skulls bore clear cracks. Some spines showed painful twists. Some lives had lasted only a few days. For a long time, people said this was Sparta discarding weak lives. But mixed in at the bottom of the well were also the bones of adult men and women. When the halo of heroism fades, the name Leonidas actually grew from such an unsettling wasteland. Tonight, let us accompany the gently flickering hearth fire and this story that requires no effort to remember, and walk together into his real life. This is not just a story about how to fight, but also about how a person is stripped of their soul by a system, and then becomes the embodiment of that system. We will see that before the famous Battle of Thermopylae, Leonidas had already been serving his sentence in that prison called Sparta for a full 50 years. Leonidas' kingship was not built on the love of his people, but on absolute fear of the slaves called helots. Beneath the Spartan dining tables, the helots, several times their number, toiled silently, bled and sweated. This extreme imbalance was like an invisible noose, tightening around the neck of every Spartan citizen. To prevent these silent laborers from taking up their sickles, the Spartans turned their own lives into a never-ending military exercise. At the age of 7, Leonidas was forcibly taken from his home. It was the last time he would feel warmth in his mother's arms. He entered a grinding mill called the Goge, where hunger was the only instructor, and cold was a lifelong companion. Boys were allowed to steal, but if caught, the punishment was not for the theft, but for the clumsiness of being discovered. The famous story of the boy who hid a fox under his cloak and let it claw his belly open rather than make a sound was the creed Leonidas learned from childhood. This pathological suppression of pain was not meant to demonstrate strength, but to prove to the system that you were no longer a person with feelings. In Leonidas' world, courage had a very specific, blood-stained definition. Every year, the Spartan ephors would formally declare war on the helots, giving all massacres a sacred, legal veneer. Leonidas was once a member of the secret police. He would hold his breath in the dark bushes, observing those strong slaves. If anyone showed even a glimmer of leadership, or simply because they were too physically robust, they would disappear on some deep night. This killing was not for military glory, but to eliminate threats lurking in the farmland. Before Leonidas' spear ever pierced a Persian, it had already, on countless nights, pierced the chests of innocent laborers. This long-term, institutionalized cruelty ground away all his compassion, leaving only steely muscle memory. He learned silence in this environment, learned not to blink under any extreme circumstances. What this training produced was not a wise ruler, but a component capable of standing at the very front of the shield wall until it turned to stone. Marriage and procreation, in Leonidas' life, were merely another way of allocating state resources. The so-called freedom of Spartan women was simply to produce stronger seed. When Leonidas married, his bride had her head shaved, wore men's clothing, and waited in a dark, bare room. He had to sneak into the bedroom late at night, complete the reproductive task, and then sneak back to his cold military barracks. The state even allowed that if a husband was old, a strong young man could be brought in to complete the conception. None of this was for love, but to ensure continuous war output, to ensure the concept of Sparta would not break. So when the flames of war approached in 480 BCE, Leonidas' logic in choosing those 300 warriors was extremely cold. He did not pick the bravest young men. He picked those 300 older fathers, who had already left behind sons. This is not romantic. This was just precise risk control. Because even if all these men died in battle, their bloodlines would remain in the system. This is the most painful, management science-infused truth behind the 300 warriors. The sun at Thermopylae shone on those red cloaks soaked in sweat. Leonidas knew he stood in an inevitable death trap. But the trap that confined him was not the Persians' 100,000-strong army, but Sparta's rigid law. It was during a religious festival, and the law forbade the full Spartan army from mobilizing. So Leonidas could only lead these few hundred men to their death. He held the pass for 3 days, not for freedom, but to fulfill the obedience that the law demanded of him. In that coastal corridor, in that narrow pass known as the Hot Gates, the fighting became mechanical clearing. The Persian arrows blotted out the sun, and the Spartan shield was their only final dignity. Leonidas fell in the final battle. His soldiers launched a near-suicidal charge to recover his body. But this charge was not born of personal loyalty, but of extreme fear of the dereliction of duty, the loss of the commander's body. In the end, when all weapons were broken, the remaining warriors finished their final task in the dirt with their fingernails, with their teeth. 40 years after the Battle of Thermopylae, Leonidas' remains were brought back to his homeland. He finally received a stone statue. On the tombstone, neither freedom nor hero was inscribed. It bore only 2 words, obedience. Sparta, that once vast and fearsome city, eventually destroyed itself with this same extreme system. Because when a society has only warriors left, and no human beings, it can no longer survive in peacetime. When Leonidas' only legacy was liberated by that Theban general, when the Helots regained their lives, Sparta collapsed. Tonight's story slowly comes to rest here. I hope Leonidas' heavy life can help you appreciate the preciousness of the present tranquility. The little hearth fire is about to die out. May you also fall asleep peacefully, in a world without shackles. The hero is long gone, but humanity endures. Good night.